going to get started.
Good morning.
Okay. We are starting Chav Vav Amud Aleph, 26a at the very top. The second line, last word on the line, Tanya. Okay, Tanya, we learned in a Brisa, Amar of Hananya ben Akavya. Rabbi Hananya ben Akavya said, this is continuing the halachos that we learned about Osik b'mitzvah patur min mitzvah. One who is involved in doing one mitzvah is not required to pause and then continue with the separate mitzvah.
Did you say we're starting at the top of the page, Rabbi?
26a at the top.
Is the word from Yisrael?
No, we're starting with the second line, last word on the line, Tanya.
Are you trying to confuse us? You're trying to trip us up?
Yep.
He's messing with our hands.
Okay. Amar Hananya ben Akavya, Kosvei Sfarim, Tefillin u'mezuzos. Those who are scribes who are writing Sifrei Torah, Tefillin, and mezuzos, Hein v'tagreya, and them and their merchants, those who market their products, v'tagre tagreya, and those who market their, those who are further down the line, v'chola oskim b'malechas shamayim, and any who are busy with matters of heaven, meaning they're involved in mitzvos or even in helping others perform mitzvos. La'asuye mochre tchelas, which is including even those who sell the tchelas, the blue dye for tzitzis, peturin mikriyashma u'minatfila u'minatifilin, we call mitzvos ha'amuros b'Torah. They are patur, they are absolved from kriyashma, from tefillah, from prayer, u'minatfilin, and from wearing tefillin, and we call mitzvos ha'amuros b'Torah from any mitzvos that are said in the Torah, that are included in the Torah, if they are in conflict with the mitzvah that they are in the middle of doing, meaning the scribe, while he's writing, does not have to pause for kriyashma, for tefillah, for tefillin. Of course, if he is not in the process of writing at that moment, he is not absolved from performing other mitzvahs, only if they're in conflict with the mitzvah that he's doing. We are 26a, Chav Vav Amud Aleph, towards the top. We started from the second line. So we're learning about the halachos of scribes that are in the middle of performing the mitzvah. L'kayim divrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili. This is to fulfill the words of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Okay. Shahaya Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Omer Rabbi Yossi Aglili taught, ha'osek b'mitzvah patur min ha'mitzvah. One who is in the process of performing a mitzvah is absolved from, he does not pause to begin another mitzvah, rather he continues with the mitzvah that he is in the process of doing. Okay, back to the halachas of Sukkah. So this is teaching me those who are absolved from Sukkah, not necessarily in the performance of a mitzvah, but even if they're in travel for a different reason, they're going to be patur from Sukkah, as we'll see. Tanu Rabbana, Holche Derachim, we're about eight lines down from the top. Tanu Rabbana, Holche Derachim Bayom, Peturim and Sukkah Bayom. Those who are traveling on the road during the daytime are patur from the sukkah during the daytime, meaning while they are traveling. But when they pause from their travels at night, they're required to seek out a sukkah to sleep in at night. Those who are traveling during the nighttime, they're patur from the sukkah at nighttime while they're traveling again. But they are chayav during the daytime, meaning when they're not traveling. During the pause from their travels, they're required to seek out a sukkah. Those who are traveling during the nighttime and the daytime, so then they are patur during the entire time that they are traveling, meaning during the nighttime and the daytime. So Tosfos explains here, this here is not when they're traveling for the performance of a mitzvah. We'll see about that halacha in a moment. Here they're traveling for their own purposes, for business, or for pleasure, whatever it might be. They are patur, as Tosfos explains, like we learned, we talked about yesterday. There's a concept of teshvu ka'in toduru. The Torah says, take your residence from your home into your sukkah. But just as a person would leave their home and travel for business or for other reasons, right? So they're permitted to do so from their sukkah as well, right? And therefore, while they're traveling, they're patur from sukkah. But it doesn't give them carte blanche. It doesn't allow them to simply be patur from sukkah for the entire time that they're gone from their home, only while they're actually traveling. However, if holchin ledvar mitzvah, If they are traveling for the performance of a mitzvah, so then Peturin bein b'yom u'bein b'layla, then they are patur for the entire time that they are traveling, even while they're not actively traveling, even when they are paused from their traveling, they are patur from sukkah, meaning that while they're traveling, they don't have to make sure that if they're going to pause their travels at night, that they have to make sure to find a place where there's going to be a sukkah. Rather, they're permitted to rest, to sleep wherever it might be, because seeking out a sukkah will delay them in their travels. And since they're traveling for the performance of a mitzvah, they're not required to seek out a sukkah along the way.
Well, but I guess the question would be, there must be gradations, levels of importance for various mitzvot, so to speak. Not all of them are the same in terms of urgency. Where's the cutoff? Where is it considered? What mitzvot are not considered grounds for?
So as we'll see in the Gemara, really it's the performance of any mitzvah. Of any mitzvah, provided that it's pressing in its time, meaning it needs to be done now, right? And there are, so for example, like Rashi explained yesterday, right? If they're going to redeem those who are in prison, right? So obviously time is of the essence, right? Or Rashi says even if they're going to learn Torah, right? And if they're going to delay from learning Torah, right? So then it's a delay in time. Clearly, the earlier they get there, the more Torah they're going to learn, right? So there too, right? Time is of the essence, right? So as we'll see in the Gemara in a moment, if they're going to visit their Torah teacher, their Rebbe, which is a mitzvah to perform on Yom Tov, so it needs to be done on Yom Tov. So then while they're traveling, they are patur from Sukkah, right? So it's really the performance of any mitzvah. They are patur from Sukkah along the way, right? If they're traveling for the performance of a mitzvah. As the Gemara is going to say, Ki hadu Rav Chizda v'Rabba bar Rav Huna, as we see in the scenario of Rav Chizda and Rabba bar Rav Huna, Ki have ailu b'Shabbata de Rigla lebei Reish Galusa. They would travel, so the custom was, and in fact it's a mitzvah for Adam lekabel pnei Rabbo b'Chag, for a person to visit his Rebbe, his Torah teacher, on Yom Tov. And this is really a derivative of, there's a mitzvah of Aliyah L'Regel, for a person to, during the time that the Beis HaMikdash was standing, there was a requirement, right? There was a mitzvah in the Torah, a positive mitzvah, for every male to go and present himself in the Beis HaMikdash on Yom Tov. Once we no longer have the Beis HaMikdash, right, in our exile, so then the Gemara says a derivative of that is for a person to visit his Torah teacher, his Torah master on Yom Tov, right? So that too is a mitzvah. And when they were traveling to perform that mitzvah, so they were traveling on, again, obviously on Yom Tov itself, one is not permitted to travel, right? We're talking about they were traveling on Chol HaMoed. So on the Chol HaMoed of Sukkot, they were traveling. While they were traveling, Havoganu Arkasa Desura, they during the nighttime, they rested, they camped along the banks of the Surah River. They did not seek out a sukkah because that would have delayed them in their travels. And the rationale that they offered was, Amri Anan Shluche Mitzvah Anan Upeturin. They said, we are traveling for the performance of a mitzvah, and therefore we are patur from sukkah. So we see that in actuality, they did rely on this ruling for them to be patur from sukkah while they were traveling for the performance of a mitzvah. Tanu Rabbanan, we learned further, Shomrei Ha'ir Bayom Peturim in Sukkah Bayom B'Chayavin Balayla. So if there are guards over the guards over the city or guards over the fields that they were guarding the crops growing in the fields, or guarding the walls of the city, so they are not required to construct the sukkah for them to stand or to remain in the sukkah during the daytime while they're guarding at their post, meaning they're allowed to eat at their post outside of even though they don't have a sukkah. So they're permitted to do so while they are on guard, right? So if they're on guard during the daytime, so then they're patur from the sukkah during the daytime, but of course at night when they're not on guard, they're required to have a sukkah. If they are balayla, peturim in a sukkah balayla, if they are stand guard at nighttime, so then they're patur from the sukkah during the nighttime while they're at guard, v'chayavin bayom, but they're obligated during the day. Shomrei ha'ir bein bayom u'bein balayla, if they are constantly on guard both nighttime and daytime, peturim in a sukkah bein bayom u'bein balayla, then they're patur both at nighttime and during the daytime. Shomer ginos upardesim, peturim ben b'yom ben b'layla. So here, if they are guarding the fields, which was outside of the city, right? So then they would remain there. So they're patur both during the nighttime and during the daytime. So says the Gemara, why is that? So let them construct the sukkah at their guard post and have a sukkah there while they're guarding. So Abaya Amar Teshvu Ke'en Tadur. Abaya says the reason for that is because, like we mentioned earlier, the Torah, the obligation of sukkah is for one to take his residence that he would normally have in his house and move his residence out to the sukkah. But if a person is going out to guard the fields, so they would always leave their house to guard their fields, so they're permitted to do so from their sukkah as well. And Rashi explains that it would be a tremendous tircha, tremendous inconvenience for a person to have to build a sukkah while he's guarding the field, and therefore the Torah did not require him to do so. Rava Amar Pirza Kora Leganav. Rava says a different rationale, a different explanation. Rava says that, and this is sort of a metaphor, that the hole in the wall calls out to the thief and says, right, come through the hole to rob the house, right? So what that means over here is that if he builds a sukkah, so he's obstructing his vision, right, of the field around him, right, the guard, right, and it calls out to the thief that it shows that the guard is not being vigilant, right? He's reclining, he's sitting in his hut, right? He doesn't have a clear view of the fields around him, and there's more likely for one to come along and try and steal the crops that are in the field, and therefore he's not going to perform his duties as well as he is supposed to. So that's why he's patur from the sukkah. My benayu says, what would be the halachic difference between these two opinions? Ike benayu de kamantar karya de peri. If, for example, the guard is not guarding crops that are out in the field, rather he's guarding crops that have already been harvested, right? And they're piled up in front of him, so it's easy for him to maintain a view of these crops, even if he were to build a sukkah. So according to Abaya, he would still be patur because it's not similar to his residence in his house. According to Rava, since he's able to fulfill his duties properly, even while he's in a sukkah, so he would be obligated to build a sukkah and to remain and to eat his meals in the sukkah, even while he's guarding the crops. Okay, so the Gemara moves on to the next statement of the Mishnah, which was regarding one who is ill, that chola, one who is ill, is patur from the sukkah. And the Mishnah stated as well, not only is the chola patur, but even those who are their caregivers are patur from the sukkah as well. So chola mumshamsheim, the one who is ill and his caregivers and their caregivers are patur from sukkah. Tanu Rabbana. So the Gemara learned an explanation of this. Chola sha'amru, this that we said one who is ill, a sick person, lo chola sheyesh bo sakana. We're not referring to one who is whose life is in danger, right? Because that goes without saying, right? One whose life is in danger and being in the sukkah. So, for example, right, if one is suffering from, let's say, one had, God forbid, pneumonia or something like that, and being out in the sukkah, right, in the cold, right, would cause his life to be in danger. So of course he's patur from the sukkah. He'd be patur from any mitzvah in the Torah if it puts his life in danger. So that goes without saying. We would not require a Mishnah to teach us that halacha. Ela afilu chola she'ein bo sakana. It's referring to even one who is ill and being in the sukkah will not place his life in danger. Not only that, afilu chash be'einav, afilu chash be'rosho, even if he's just in a state of discomfort. So he has a headache, right? He has pain in his eye, and being in the sukkah will cause him further discomfort. So then he is patur from being in the sukkah. Now, obviously, if he is in pain or discomfort, but being in the sukkah does not in any way add to that, right? And staying outside the sukkah, remaining in his home, will not in any way alleviate the pain. So then he's not going to be patur from the sukkah, right? It's only where, for example, let's say he has a headache, right? And being in the sukkah, let's say there's a large crowd in the sukkah and it's giving him, it's making his headache worse, right? Or being out in the cold is causing him further discomfort, right? Further pain. Or being out in the heat is causing him further pain, or whatever it might be. So then, if by being inside his house it will alleviate his pain, so then he is patur from being in the sukkah. Amar Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, Pam achas chashti be'enai beKesari. One time I had pain in my eye in Kesari, in Caesarea where he was, and Vehitir Rabbi Yossi beRebbi Lishan Ani Umishamshai Chutz LaSukkah, and Rabbi Yossi beRebbi, and Rashi notes that this title, Rabbi Yossi beRebbi, Rabbi Yossi the Rebbe, the teacher, the master, was to distinguish him. There were many Rabbi Yossis, many Tanaim who were known, who had the name Yossi, and this was distinguishing him as the greatest of all of them. Rashi identifies him as Rav Yossi ben Chalafta, and he was the greatest of the Rav Yossis, and therefore he carried the title of Rav Yossi beRebbi, and he permitted Rav Shimon ben Gamliel to sleep, not only him but his caregivers, those who were his meshamish, those who his servant who served him were permitted to sleep outside the sukkah, because being in the sukkah would cause him further pain in his eye. Rav Sharala of Acha Bardala Lamagna Bechilta Besukkah Mishum Baki. Rav permitted Rav Acha Bardala to sleep under a canopy, under a netting in the sukkah, even though Rashi explains by sleeping under a canopy, right, it's as if he's not in the sukkah at all, right, because the canopy blocks him from the schach, right, and therefore it invalidates him from being. It doesn't invalidate the sukkah; it invalidates the individual is not considered to be in the sukkah. And nevertheless, he permitted him to do so, mishum baki, because of there were bugs, mosquitoes, or whatever it might be that would cause him tremendous discomfort while he is sleeping in the sukkah, and therefore he permitted him to put up a netting to protect him from the insects. Rava Sharale Rav Acha Bar Ada Lemigna Barmi Mitalalta. Rava permitted Rav Acha Bar Ada to sleep outside the sukkah mishum sircha de gargishta, because the earth that the sukkah that they used a clay as the floor of the sukkah, and that clay carried a foul odor, and that was disturbing to him. And I guess the idea is that he was more sensitive than others to this odor. So therefore, there were others who were able to stay in the sukkah, but for him, it caused him tremendous discomfort, and therefore he permitted him to sleep outside the sukkah. Rava l'tamei, and this is Rava following his opinion, the Amar Rava mitztaer patur min sukkah, that not only one who is ill, but even one who is perfectly healthy, right? But he is caused discomfort by being in the sukkah, so he too is patur from the sukkah. Now the Gemara questions this. Asks the Gemara of Ha'anan Tanan, but we learned in the Mishnah, Cholin u'mishamshein paturim min sukkah. One who is ill is absolved from being in the sukkah. Now, this would seem to indicate to us cholein mitzdair lo, that only one who is actually ill, right, and being in the sukkah exacerbates his illness, so then he's patur from the sukkah. But not one who is simply being caused discomfort, right? How do we understand that? Because if the halacha was that even one who is in a matter of discomfort, right, a state of discomfort from being in the sukkah is patur, so the Mishnah should have stated that. That would be a bigger chidush, right? That would teach us a greater halacha. So the Mishnah should have said that. Why did the Mishnah limit itself to one who is ill, right? It should have stated mitzdair. So it would seem to indicate that only one who is actually ill is patur from sukkah, not one who is simply caused discomfort by the sukkah. So answers the Gemara, Amri cholehu u'mishamshav peturim. No, the Mishnah is teaching us as follows: that one who is ill, not only is he absolved from the sukkah, but even those who are his caregivers are patur from the sukkah as well. However, mitzdair hu patur mishamshav lo. However, one who is not ill, but it's simply the sukkah is causing him discomfort, so he is absolved from being in the sukkah, but his caregivers are not. So that's the distinction between one who is ill and one who simply is caused discomfort, and therefore the Mishnah only talked about one who is ill, but not one who is caused discomfort. Okay, so on to the next halacha of the Mishnah. Ochlim achilas arai chutz l'sukkah. One is permitted to snack outside the sukkah. So v'kama achilas arai. So the Gemara now wants to define how do we define a snack, right? What is considered a snack and what is already considered a meal that one would be obligated in the sukkah. So Amar Rav Yosef said, Tarti otlas bei, up to 2 or 3 bei, an egg. So up to 2 or 3 mouthfuls, which is the size of an egg. So such a up to that amount is considered a snack. More than that amount would be considered a meal, and one would be obligated to eat that inside the sukkah. Amar le Abaye, v'ha zimnin sagiin sagi leinshi b'hachi. So Abaya questions this. Abaya says that many times, right, that would be the full amount that a person would eat for a meal, even the size of 2 or 3, enough food to be considered the volume of 2 or 3 eggs. That's enough to be considered a full meal for an individual. So certainly we cannot call that we can't call that a snack.
What if you don't have bread?
What?
If you don't have bread.
Even if it's not bread, right? If a person is eating enough food, right? So if it's meat or fish or whatever it might be, if it's the size of 2 or 3 eggs, so that's the amount. So Rav Yosef called that a snack, but Abaya said that many times that's all a person eats as their full meal. So we can't call that, we cannot label that as a snack. So rather, rather it's the amount that a Torah student, a Talmud Chacham would eat before going to learn Torah, if he's concerned that the learning will stretch out, and he's concerned that he'll be very hungry, he'll be famished during that time. So he would eat a little bit before he would go to study the Torah. And Rashi explains that would be the amount of the volume of 1 egg. So according to Abaya, the volume of 1 egg would be considered a snack. More than that would be considered a meal, and he would be required to eat that in the sukkah. So Tanu Rabbanan, the Gemara teaches further, Ochlin achilas arai chutz l'sukkah. One is permitted to eat a snack outside the sukkah. Ve'ein yeshenim shinas arai chutz l'sukkah. However, he may not take even a nap is not permitted outside the sukkah. So one who is going to sleep for the nighttime is certainly required to sleep in the sukkah. But even a nap, right? Even a small snooze, even a small nap is obligated in the sukkah, meaning that there's no allowance for even a small nap outside the sukkah. My timer, what is the reason for this? Meaning, why is it that we permit a snack regarding food? We permit a small snack outside the sukkah, but we don't permit a small nap outside the sukkah. So Amar Rav Ashi Gezerah Shema Yeradim. So Rav Ashi says simply because we're concerned that his intent might be to have a short nap, right? But he might fall into a deeper sleep, right? Those of us who take a nap Shabbos afternoon are well acquainted with this occurrence, right? Right? You tell your wife, I'm just going to lay down for 20 minutes, right? 3-4 hours later, one finally drags himself out of bed. So we know that we're concerned that he might fall into a deeper sleep. That's the explanation of Rav Ashi. Amalei Abaye. So Abaye does not accept this. Abaye questions this explanation that the reason why a small nap is forbidden is because we're concerned he might fall into a deeper sleep. So Abaye says, Alahad Tanya. We learned in a brisa, Yashin Adam Shinas Arai B'Tfilin, Avalo Shinas Keva. So again, we have to remember that in the times of the Gemara, they wore tefillin all day long, right? So meaning they're constantly wearing tefillin. So the halacha was that one is permitted to take a small nap, right, a small rest while wearing his tefillin, but not a long slumber, not a deep sleep, right? The reason for this behind this is that a person is required to keep his body in a state of cleanliness while he is wearing his tefillin. Right, one is not permitted to pass gas while he's wearing tefillin, and the concern is if he goes into a deeper sleep, right, then he doesn't have control over his bodily functions while he's sleeping, and he cannot be guaranteed to keep his body in a state of cleanliness. However, a small nap, we're not concerned, so that would be permitted. Now the question is, but why are we not concerned that if he lays down for a short nap, he might fall into a deeper sleep? Right, according to Rav Ashi, that there is such a concern regarding sukkah, why would we not have a similar concern regarding tefillin? So Amar Rav Yosef Breidu Abiloi, the Moshe Shinasa Lacherim. So Rav Yosef explains that perhaps this allowance for a short nap is referring to a case where he asks somebody else to be his shomer, to be his watch person, that person will wake him up. Right, so he tells somebody, "Wake me up in 20 minutes or so." Right, so then he would be permitted to take a small nap. Maskif flavor of Mesharshia. So Mesharshia does not accept this halacha because he says that your guarantor requires a guarantor for himself, meaning you're going to ask somebody else to wake you up in 20 minutes. He might fall asleep as well, right? Both of you will wake up 2 hours later, right? So we therefore do not rely on somebody else to wake a person up from sleep. Exactly. Both of you surface several hours later, right? So therefore, we don't rely on this halacha, right? So Amar Rabba bar Rachana, Amar of Yochanan. So the question remains, right? If we have such a concern regarding sukkah, why do we not have such a concern regarding tefillin? So Amar Rabba bar Rachana, Amar of Yochanan, b'meniach rosho ben birkav askinan. We're referring to a case where a person does not lay down, right? Rather, he rests his head between his knees, meaning he in a position, right? He puts his head down on the table, right? It's a position where we don't have to be concerned that he's going to fall asleep into a deep sleep for hours, right? So therefore, in that case, it would be permitted, but to lay down would be forbidden because there we have to be concerned that he's going to fall into a deep sleep. Rava offers a different reasoning, a different rationale for why sleeping outside the sukkah is forbidden, even a small nap. Rava Amar ein keva l'shina. Rava says that regarding eating a meal, we can easily draw a distinction between eating a snack and eating a full meal. However, when it comes to sleep, all sleep is forbidden outside the sukkah. There's no distinction between a nap and a deep slumber, a deep sleep. All of them are forbidden outside the sukkah. So now that we mentioned this halacha regarding sleeping in tefillin, so the Gemara is going to elaborate on this a little bit. Tani chada, we learned in one brayso, yashin adam betefillin shinas arai avalo shinas keva. So in one place we learned that regarding tefillin, one may sleep a small nap, but not a full sleep, not a deep slumber. V'tanya idach, we learned in a different brayso, bein keva ben arai, that he's permitted both to take a nap and even a deep slumber. But Tanya Idach, we learned in a third brayso, lo keva v'lo arai, is not permitted to sleep at all, even a short nap. So we have three braysos that seem to contradict each other. So how do we explain them? Answers the Gemara lo kasha. They're referring to three different cases, three different scenarios. Ha de nakid lehu biyadeh. One is referring to a case where he's holding his tefillin in his hands. So if he's holding his tefillin in his hands, then he's not permitted to rest at all, even a short nap, because we're concerned that he might drop his tefillin. Okay, so therefore he's forbidden from resting at all. The second, the brayso which permits him to take a nap but not a deep slumber, is when he's actually wearing the tefillin. Right, so if he's wearing the tefillin, so then as we mentioned, a nap is permitted, but a deep slumber is forbidden, again because he cannot maintain a state of cleanliness. This that we permit him to take a deep sleep is when he has this tefillin with him. His tefillin are in the room with him, but he covers them with a cloth, and in that case, he's permitted to take a deep sleep at all, because otherwise, right, a person would never be permitted to go to sleep. Right, if he has his tefillin with him, he's going to have to constantly stay awake. Obviously, that's not possible. Right, so therefore, he's permitted to go to sleep, even if his tefillin are in the room with him, because otherwise it would be impossible. Okay, so v'kama shinas arai. So what is considered a nap? Right, this that we talked about, he's permitted to take a short nap, but not a deep sleep. So what is the line between a nap and a deep sleep? At what point do we say this is considered a sleep and no longer a nap? Tani Rama by Yecheskel, Rami by Yecheskel taught kedei hiluch mea ama, enough time that it takes a person to travel 100 amos, right, which would be anywhere between 150 to 200 feet, which is not a very long time at all. So it would be right, a short amount of time. Tanya Nami, right? Similarly, we learned Tanya Nami Hachi. We learned in a brayso Hayashen betfillin veroa keri, one who is sleeping in his tefillin, and he has a seminal emission in his sleep. So now he's in a state of impurity. Oches beritzua ve'ena oches bekitzitza. So he must immediately remove his tefillin. Right? He may not wear them in this state of impurity while he has this seminal emission, and therefore he's required to remove his tefillin. However, he's not permitted. This is going on to 26b. At the top of 26b, he is not permitted to touch the actual tefillin while he's in this state of impurity. So he's not permitted to touch the tefillin. So he has to remove the tefillin by pulling on the straps of the tefillin on the ritzuos without actually touching the tefillin itself. Okay. Divrei Rabbi Yaakov, that's the opinion of Rabbi Yaakov. So this supports what we just said And the Chacham said, Yashinanu v'tefillin shinas arai, avalo shinas keva. One is permitted to sleep only a short nap in his tefillin, but not a deep slumber. Again, the reason for that is so that he will not have this concern of coming to a seminal emission while he's wearing the tefillin. So therefore, he's only permitted a short nap, not a deep sleep. V'kama shinas arai, and what is considered a short nap? Kidei hiluch mea ama, traveling 100 amma. Amar Rav. Rav says, and this is even referring to one who is not wearing tefillin, Asr la'adam lishan bayom yosem mishinas hasus. One is not permitted to sleep during the daytime more than a horse would nap. So horses don't fall into a deep slumber. They simply they go into a short nap at that time. And one is not permitted to nap longer than that. And Rashi explains this is not referring to one who's wearing tefillin. We're talking about even without tefillin. It's referring to a Torah scholar, one who devotes his time to learning Torah. So he's not permitted. He's not permitted to take time off from learning Torah to sleep during the daytime more than the nap of a horse, which we'll see what that is in a moment. And again, this is referring to one, obviously, where he has the energy to continue learning Torah. But if he's so exhausted that if he were to stay awake, he cannot continue to learn Torah. So then better that he should sleep and then be able to learn Torah. But we're talking about one who is able to learn Torah and he simply wants to take a nap. So then he's not permitted to nap more than the amount that a horse would sleep. The kamashinas hasus, and what is that? Shitin nishme, 60 breaths, which the poskim really understand that to mean 60 minutes. So one is not permitted to sleep more than an hour during the daytime. Again, this is referring to one who has the ability to stay awake, right? He has the physical ability to stay awake. He's simply choosing to take a nap. So then he's not permitted to take time off from learning Torah more than 60 minutes. Amar Abaye, Shnase Demar. So Abaye said, the sleep of my master, who Rashi identifies as Rabbi Bar Nachmani, he was the one who taught Abaye Torah. So Shnase Demar, his sleep, Kidirav, followed the opinion of Rav that it was not more than 60 minutes. Udirav, Kidirebi, Rav was taught this by Rebbe, by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Udirebi Kididavid, and Rebbe learned this from David HaMelech, but the David Kidisusya, and David learned this from the sleep of the horse. Udisusya, Shita Nishmi, and the sleep of the horse was 60 minutes. Abaye Havanayim Kidama'ayel Mipumbadisa Lebekubi. Abaye would sleep for a longer amount from the amount of time it took to travel from Pumbadisa Lebekubi. Kari Ale Rav Yosef, and Rav Yosef was not happy with this. Rav Yosef said about this, Ad Masai Otzel Tishkav, how long will you recline? Will you lie down? The lazy person, Masai Taku Mishnasecha, when will you finally arise from your slumber? So Rav Yosef felt that this bordered on laziness for a person to sleep the amount of time that Abaye was sleeping. Tanu Rabbanan, we learned further about one who was wearing tefillin, Anichnas Lishan Bayom, one who was going to nap during the daytime. Ratza Choletz, Ratza Meniach, he's permitted to wear his tefillin while he takes this nap. And the reason is because we're not concerned that in a short nap during the daytime he's going to come to a seminal emission. But if he's going to sleep for the nighttime, Choletz ve'eno maniach, he's required to remove his tefillin. Divrei Rabbi Nassan. This is the opinion of Rabbi Nassan. Rabbi Yossi Omer Hayeladim. So the young men la'olam cholzin, they're required to remove their tefillin. Ve'eno manichin, they're not allowed to put on tefillin, even for a nap during the daytime, because they are more likely than an older person to come to a seminal emission, and therefore even during the daytime there's such a concern, and they're required to remove their tefillin. Lema kasavar Rabbi Yossi balkeri asur lahaniach tefillin. So says the Gemara, does Rabbi Yossi in fact hold that one who had a seminal emission is forbidden from putting on tefillin? So, if in that case, any person who had a seminal emission at any point in time before he would be tovel in a mikveh would then be forbidden from putting on tefillin. So Amar Abaye says, no, that's not the case, but rather, B'yeladim u'neshosei mohen askinon, we're referring to where they are sleeping, where their wife is sleeping in the room with them, Shema yavoyu l'dei hergel davar, that perhaps they might, as we'll see in a moment, they might come to have relations during the time that they're, and forgetting that they're wearing their tefillin. So since that's the concern, they're required to remove their tefillin. Again, this is we have to remember that they were constantly wearing their tefillin the entire day, right? So it's possible that they might forget even that they were wearing them. Tanu Rabbanan shochach v'shimesh mitaso b'tefillin. If one did in fact forget that he was wearing his tefillin and he had relations, so he's required to remove his tefillin. However, eino ochiz lo b'ritzua v'lo b'ktzitza ad sheyitol yadav. He's not permitted to touch his tefillin, to remove them until he washes his hands. Only then can he remove his tefillin. Because the hands are very busy, meaning the hands have come in contact with areas of the body that are considered unclean, and therefore he must wash his hands before he touches his tefillin in order to remove them. Okay, the Gemara brings a Mishnah now that relates stories about the Tanaim who were brought food outside the sukkah, and we'll see what their reaction was. Maaseh, there was a story of Ve'eviu lo Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai lito mesatavshu. So they brought before Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai even just to taste from the food that was being cooked. Rabbi Gamliel shnei kosavos, and for Rabbi Gamliel they brought the size of 2 dates or 2 figs, udlisha mayim, and a pitcher of water, which is certainly less than the amount of the volume of an egg that we learned about. And they refused to eat from it. They said, take it up to the sukkah. I will only eat it inside the sukkah. However, when they brought Reb Tzadok food that was less than a kebeah outside the sukkah, natlo b'mapa, so he took it with a handkerchief, with a cloth, meaning he did not wash his hands before he ate from this food, and v'achlo chutz l'sukkah, and he ate it outside the sukkah, v'lo birech acharav, and he did not recite birchas hamazon, he did not bench after eating this amount that was less, this bread that was less than a kebeah. So now, the Gemara questions this. We learned earlier in the Gemara that one is permitted to eat a snack outside the sukkah, and we define the snack as being less than the volume of an egg, right? And now we just brought a Mishnah which says that Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rav Gamliel refused even to taste, right, the food, right, which is certainly less than a kebeah outside of the sukkah, which seems to contradict the halacha that we just learned. So asks the Gemara, Maaseh listor? Did you bring me a Mishnah? Did you relate a story to contradict the halacha that we just learned? Right? Why would you bring a story to contradict yourself? So answers the Gemara, no. There are words missing from the conversation here in the Mishnah, and what we meant to say was as follows: In bala hachmir al atzmo machmir, so let's be mishum yuara. That in certain instances we say that this is the halacha, and one is not permitted to take on extra stringencies upon himself, because if one does so, it's considered yuara, it's considered hubris, it's considered gava, right? He seems to be elevating himself above the people, right? That he's acting haughty, right? He's saying, I'm a greater person, right? And therefore we discourage a person from taking on extra stringencies in certain cases, right? Because we say he's considered to be considering himself better than the others, right? He's being haughty and aloof from other people. However, this Mishnah is teaching us that regarding sukkah, that's not the case. Regarding sukkah, one who wishes to take extra stringencies and he's not going to eat anything, even a snack outside the sukkah, he is permitted to do so, right? And it's considered it's praiseworthy for a person to try and take all his food inside the sukkah. And therefore, and we're illustrating this halacha, right, by bringing these stories to show that in fact that was the custom of Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rav Gamliel, that they were stringent and they ate all of their food inside the sukkah. And since we see that they did so, it's teaching us that it's not considered haughtiness, it's not considered hubris for a person to take on that extra stringency regarding sukkah, and rather it's praiseworthy. And this is how it's brought down in halacha as well, that it's praiseworthy for a person to try and take all their food inside the sukkah, right? So that's the halacha, meaning if you're inside your house and you can just as easily take your food out to the sukkah, out to the patio, right? So then a person should, even if he's just making himself a cup of coffee, he's just grabbing right, a bite to eat, he should preferably, although it's permitted to eat it outside the sukkah, he should preferably take it out into the sukkah, right? Because why not? He's fulfilling a mitzvah by doing so. Again, however, if it's going to cause him discomfort, meaning he doesn't have a sukkah, right? So, and simply is going to refrain from eating, is going to be hungry, is going to be thirsty, right? So one should not do so because that's going to take away from his simchas Yom Tov, his enjoyment of Yom Tov. So certainly in that case, a person should not cause himself discomfort by refusing to eat outside the sukkah. But again, if it's at all possible, then it's praiseworthy for a person to take all their food out to the sukkah, although it is permitted again to eat a snack outside the sukkah. Okay, and that's what the Mishnah is illustrating, that Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai and Ram Gamliel took this extra stringency upon themselves. Okay, so we're going on to 27a, that we see in fact this was the custom of Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai and Ram Gamliel. However, Rabbi Tzadok did not take this stringency upon himself, and when they brought him bread that was less than a less than a kebeah, right? So less than the volume of an egg, natlo b'mapa. So he did not wash his hands before eating that amount of bread, because he was of the opinion that one is not required to wash their hands for the amount of food for bread less than a kebeah, less than that of an egg. However, for cleanliness, he did make sure to use a cloth, meaning he did not have his hands directly in contact with the food. He used a cloth to hold the food, a napkin, right, or a handkerchief. Va'achlo chutz l'sukkah, and he ate it outside the sukkah. So again, you see that he did not take this stringency upon himself. V'lo birech acharav, and he did not recite birchat hamazon. He did not bench after eating this amount that was less than a kebeah, because he was of the opinion that the Torah states v'achalta v'savata uverachta, that the obligation of birchat hamazon comes when one eats and he is satisfied, and one is not satisfied with less than the volume of an egg. So therefore, the obligation of birchat hamazon only comes when one eats the volume of an egg. However, many others were of the opinion, and the Klal Yisrael accepted upon themselves the obligation to recite birchat hamazon even on a kazayas. So even when one eats the amount of an olive, which is significantly less than the volume of an egg, and that's the halacha that we follow, is that we recite birchat hamazon even on a kazayas. However, Reb Tzadok was of the opinion that only on a kebeah, and therefore he did not recite birchat hamazon. Now, the Gemara, however, is to say as follows: if we brought this story of Reb Tzadok to say that he did not enter the sukkah for less than a kebeah, that would seem to indicate to us that for the volume of an egg or more, he would have gone into the sukkah, right? Now, this seems to contradict what we just said from Rav Yosef and Abaye. Rav Yosef said that even up to 2 or 3 eggs is considered a snack, and he's not obligated in sukkah. Abaye said at least less than the volume of an egg is permitted, right? So Lema Tavet Yufte to Rav Yosef Abaye. This would seem to contradict Rav Yosef and Abaye. So answers the Gemara, Dilma Pachos Mikabeya Netila Obracha Lobai. So it says Gemara, no. Really for sukkah, he even more than the volume of an egg, he would not have entered the sukkah, even up to 2 or 3 eggs, right? But this that the Mishnah brings a story of less than an egg, that was only regarding the other 2 halachos regarding washing his hands and reciting birchat hamazon. So there, the cutoff is at a kabeah, at the volume of an egg, right? But regarding sukkah, really, even more than an egg, he would not have entered the sukkah. So regarding the halachos of so netila or bracha lobai, there he's not required, less than an egg, he's not required to wash his hands or to recite birchat hamazon, hakebeya, but on the volume of an egg, ba'i netila or bracha, there he is required to wash his hands and to recite birchat hamazon. So regarding those halachos is why we set the limit at a kebeya, but regarding sukkah, even more than that, he would not have been required to enter to enter the sukkah, even up to 2 or 3 eggs, following the opinion of Rav Yosef, or according to Abaye, at least the volume of an egg, he would not be required to enter the sukkah. Okay, that's all for today. We'll stop here.